reserved here. Now, I had to challenge the 9 o'clock service to kind of up their ante a little bit, but apparently we need to do that here. So you all have slept in, apparently, in some way, shape, or form, right? So let's kind of get crazy here. Let's kind of know that, like, we're going to have a good morning ahead. Is that cool? Can we do that? There we go. Right on. Now, here's the thing. How many guys in here have ever been to SeaWorld before? Right? Now, before you curb your blackfish agenda, right, whatever it is for you, I'm not advocating SeaWorld. I love SeaWorld, but I'm not advocating it for you, right? But how many of you have ever been to SeaWorld? There you go. Right, you know, like when you go to like the Shamu section, there's like the 4 or 5 rows of the red seats. That's like the splash zone. Yeah? You all know what I'm talking about? So I've been battling this cold for a while here. I don't think it's super bug. We don't know yet, right? I'm just kidding. But there's like the splash zone. So I just warn you, those of you in the first 3 rows, that is considered the splash zone this morning. I have no idea what's happening up here. I'm really hopped up on some good meds right now, so I'm feeling good. Just kind of, you've been warned, all right? Now, don't think you can move seats because the first service, they were empty. People didn't sit there. And so the germs that have spewed from my entity up here have already like made their home there. Like they've multiplied, they've set up shop. It's towns and villages and all that stuff. They've elected presidents and all that stuff. So you're good, right? So just enjoy it, right? Just enjoy the sickness. The gift goes on. Anyone been sick at all over these past few weeks? Yeah, right? I don't say that for pity. I'm just saying that for warning, right? There's your warning. You've all been warned. Very cool. So that's my cautionary note this morning. The second one is this. So welcome. Glad you're here. We're starting a brand new series this morning, obviously called, Walk Away. And so I'm glad that you are here. And here's what I know about today, right? Over the next 3 weeks, as me and Pastor Mike really kind of share just different things that I guarantee you or someone you know, someone you love has thought of some point in your life. And so I just simply challenge you to dive in, especially over these next 3 weeks, especially as we launch into Easter coming up. Golly, right? Easter's super early this year. But I just challenge you guys just to hang out with us, especially these next 3 weeks. So use your bulletin notes, all that kind of fun stuff, because I firmly believe that we have something for you specifically over these next few weeks in particular. Is that cool? Right on. Very, very cool. So here's the thing. We're going to get going. But before we really kind of get going, I just kind of thought we would enjoy just a little bit of group confession. Right? Because that's kind of good for the soul a little bit. It's therapy. You know what I'm talking about? It's therapy. So here is my question for every single one of you. Hands raising will tell me that you are, yes, that you agree with me on this. Right? Here's what it is. How many of you in here have personal stereotypes? Raise them up. Right? Now, I'm talking a little bit deeper than the whole idea of men don't read directions and women don't know how to drive, like the 2 oldest stereotypes literally on earth itself. Right? I'm talking a little bit deeper than that. Like maybe for you, well, first of all, I just noticed that not everyone raised their hands. Okay? I am now stereotyping you as a compulsive liar because we all have stereotypes, all right? That's just what it is, whether we admit it or not. But maybe for you, maybe you learned a little bit of information about someone that you knew or that you didn't know, but regardless, you learned a little bit of information about a person, and you felt as though that one small nugget of information about that person was like your oracle to completely having this person 100% figured out, right? We all do it, whether we choose to admit it or not, right? We all do it. Now, others of you in here, how many of you in here, I'm a people watcher? Anyone else, you just enjoy watching people? You like the strangers, not in a criminal, weird way, you enjoy watching strangers, but you just enjoy watching people, right? Raise it up, right? Come with me here. There we go, right? I just love just being able just to watch people and just kind of, I guess, assume what their stories are. Anyone else do that? You kind of look at them and you kind of wonder, how they're presenting themselves, what they're wearing, what they're doing, where they're going, all those things. You kind of think, you know what? And kind of assume your story a little bit, right? Whether you're wrong or not, but whatever, we all have those stereotypes. Here's the thing. We've all done it. And even on top of that, a lot of us tend to think that maybe we learned something, maybe we saw something, maybe we heard something about a person or from that person, and we just assume that we're able to now label them. We're now able to pigeonhole them. We're able to basically box them in, right? Nobody puts baby in a corner, right? I mean, you all like that movie, right? Oh, that's a thing. But here's where we're going, right? Over the next 3 weeks at Riverside Wesleyan Church, We are going to spend this time talking about one person in particular. One guy from the New Testament. And this guy is one of Jesus' disciples. Now, some of us, just hearing those two truths, the fact that he's in the Bible and that he was a follower, that he was a disciple of Jesus Christ, we have already begun to kind of assume that we know what this guy was all about, right? I mean, he had to have been faithful. He had to have been obedient. He had to have been like really well-mannered. He had to have like really well-defined calf muscles. They walked a lot, all right? But all of these assumptions start pouring into our head. I mean, if this guy that we're going to talk about over the next 3 weeks, if he truly was one of the guys that Jesus actually wanted to have around him, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 3 years. This guy that Jesus chose, he had to have been like this incredibly super good representation of what Jesus wanted his followers to look like. Or maybe he just knew how to party. Either way, no buzzkills allowed, right? But maybe. But what if? What if as you sit there today, as I stand up here, what if I told you a little bit about who this guy really was? What if I told you that at one moment, this guy got so worked up, so angry, so hacked off, in a fit of rage, he sliced off someone's ear? What if? What if I told you that this guy used to lie about the company that he kept? Namely, the company that he kept with Jesus. What if I told you that one time Jesus, to his face, rebuked him and called him Satan? That's pretty offensive right there, right? Like, I don't know how many people in your life like you have legitimately referred to as Satan, right? You can probably count up. Mine's been 4. One was this week, right? That's just what it is. You don't throw that thing around lightly. But seriously, but what if I told you that in spite of all those things, in spite of those truths that we now understand, that this guy, this same guy, was the exact same one who ended up being the foundation that Jesus decided that his church was going to be built on. Think about that. I mean, kind of knowing that and kind of somewhat understanding that in our realm of understanding, right? Like, that kind of messes with our stereotypes, doesn't it? I mean, maybe you thought that you totally understood what a follower of Christ is supposed to do. You understood what they're supposed to say, how they're supposed to act, when they're supposed to go, and where they're supposed to go. Maybe you thought that you had this whole Jesus follower thing under wraps. You understood it. But maybe hearing the truth that we just talked about makes you think, you know what? Maybe I'm not quite sure. So some of us, right? Some of us hear those truths. We hear those facts about this guy, and we kind of take some interest in it a little bit. I mean, some of us, we think, like if that guy could be that messed up, if that guy could do all of those like legitimately crazy things like me, like, I may be okay. Others of us pull out our timepieces in our pocket, our pocket watch, and we dust off our monocle, and we think, why in the world would Jesus spend time with someone like that? He's volatile. He's crazy. He's flaky. He's insane. Some of us think those things. Either way, wherever you fall on that spectrum, wherever your viewpoint falls, every single one of us in this room, we have an idea in our heads of what a Christ follower should look like. True? Which is also why you and I are incredibly familiar with the concept of what we're going to talk about today. And that's the idea of guilt. Guilt. Let me give you the definition that we're going to be working from on guilt. Guilt is the feeling that we get when we don't match the picture in our heads of what we think we should look like as followers of Jesus Christ. One more time. Guilt is a feeling that you and I get when we don't match the picture in our heads of what we think that we should look like as Christ followers. Guilt. It's that feeling that you get when you wake up in the morning hungover. Guilt. It's the feeling that you get when you open up your browser and realize there's a lot of search history on there that should not be on there. Guilt. It's the feeling that you and I get when we walk back into the room and have to stand face to face with the person who we just verbally assaulted. Eventually, when, not if, when you and I mess up again and again and again and again, when we mess up, we just tend to think that we just aren't cut out for everything that being a Christ follower entails, that everything that it requires. I mean, guilt is a really powerful thing. And I actually tend to think that the hardest part of guilt is actually what it creates inside of us. The feelings that it begins to conjure up, because guilt comes in your bulletin. Guilt comes when you and I know that there is a standard that we should be meeting that we're not. Guilt comes when we know that there is a standard that we should be meeting that we aren't meeting, and not meeting that frustration, meeting that requirement, not meeting that standard, it actually can create some frustration in us. It can give us sensations of disappointment if we aren't living the way that we feel that we should be living. So quite honestly, a lot of us will do just about anything, including avoiding a religion that we feel is only going to escalate that feeling. We will do anything to rid ourselves of guilt. So a lot of us, a lot of people we know, just choose to walk away. But this morning, as we open up the Word of God, as we look at this follower of Jesus Christ, I firmly believe over the next 3 weeks, we are going to find some hope despite the guilt. Hey, I even think our understanding of Christianity is going to change. I think that we may be surprised at how we learn to handle our own guilt, the own sense of not measuring up that we all face. But really, over the next 3 weeks, you and I, we're going to talk about a guy, and we're going to learn the story of a man named Peter. And my hope is that we're going to be inspired. And my hope is I think that you and I are going to find ourselves aiming to be a lot more like Peter than we ever thought before. So of course, if there was anyone, literally anyone in the scripture, anyone in history who was really familiar with this feeling of guilt, it was Peter. Peter, he had high expectations for himself. What we actually know about Peter, maybe you don't know this, but as a disciple of Jesus Christ, what we have to realize that this is a man who left his livelihood. This is a man who gave it all up. His job, his family, his house, his comfort, he left that all in order to follow Jesus, to physically follow Jesus. This is a guy who wanted to get things right. He wanted Jesus himself to know just how committed Peter, was to this whole thing. And so what we find out, and then again, if you know anything about Peter, you know that he was never, ever really afraid to speak up. In fact, Peter was never really afraid to speak out to get Jesus' attention. And so what we read over and over and over again is that Peter did that. Peter spoke up, Peter spoke out often, all the time. And sometimes it was good. Sometimes it was bad. But this morning, I actually just want to take a look at one of Peter's stories that actually comes towards the end of Jesus' life. This is a story that comes towards the end of Jesus' life, and it takes place the exact night that Jesus was arrested. So the scene, let me set it up for you. The scene that we're really going to kind of be looking at would actually be a really uncomfortable scene. It would be a pretty tense moment in the room because Jesus, he actually knows that his time left on earth is short. He knows that his time left on earth is so short, and so he wants to communicate this strong and lasting message to his disciples. On the other hand, while Jesus has this all understanding, while Jesus knows what's up, the disciples, they just think that they're just enjoying dinner. They just think that they're just enjoying another Passover feast as they have done in the past, enjoying it with their friends, and they just don't feel the same sense of urgency that Jesus does. So quite honestly, it sounds a little crazy when Jesus starts to talk the way that he does. So we're going to be in Mark 14:27 in just a moment. But in the middle of their meal together, literally, they're passing the food down. They're talking about life, whatever they did that day, all of those things. They're just having conversation. Literally in the middle of the meal, just hours before Jesus was to be handed over to these officials who intended to kill him. We pick up on the story. Again, Mark chapter 14 basically lets us in to this whole conversation. Mark 14:27 through 28 says this. This is Jesus talking at the table. He says, "All of you will desert me, but after I am raised to the dead, I will go ahead of you to Galilee and meet you there." Kind of odd, right? See, what's interesting is we know the end of the story here. We have a slight advantage to what the guy's got going on back there. But just kind of hold that thought, put yourself in that moment for a second, and what comes next out of Peter's mouth is like typical Peter. Like classic Peter 101. Mark 14:29, Peter pipes up. In the middle of the dinner table, in the middle of all of his buddies, Peter says to him, Mark 29, even Jesus, even if everyone else deserts you, I never will. Let me now set the new tone in the room. See, the disciples, again, have no idea that Jesus is about to die. No idea that this man that they've lived life with, closely with, for over 3 years, they have no clue that he is about to die, let alone that he's going to be resurrected. Yet, when Peter realizes what is going on, when Jesus himself alludes to the fact that he's going to conquer death, that he is going to come back to life after being dead, what causes Peter to react is not that fact. It's not this like crazy, like mind-blowing moment where Peter's like, oh my gosh, you're gonna come back to life, right? It doesn't even faze Peter. What causes Peter to react is this challenge that he hears of saying, all of you are going to desert me. And that's when Peter pipes up, challenge accepted. They might, Jesus, not me. All these other guys, they might say, peace out, I'm done, but not me. I never will. So I love this. Jesus responds directly to Peter. Now for me, I imagine this being like very loud and like up front, like in front of everyone, kind of like sticking it to Peter a little bit. I don't think Jesus did that. I would. I'm not Jesus, clearly, right? But that's how I would do it. So I like to imagine it that way. It's a little more fun. But I imagine that on this table, Jesus then singles Peter out. And in verse 31, this is what happened. It's almost as if Jesus is like calling Peter to the carpet. He says, no. You, Peter, you personally are going to deny me 3 times before the sun even comes up. And Peter's back at it, right? No, declared Peter. Even if I have to die with you, I will never deny you. Now, we got to kind of hand it to Peter a little bit, right? Way to go, Peter. Like, you stepped out. Maybe you said he knew it was true, right? Right there, Peter wanted to know. He wanted everyone to know, especially Jesus, that he was all in. Flash forward. Spoiler alert, if you haven't heard the story before, let me tell you, right? You might have guessed it. Jesus was right. Shocking. But Jesus is right, and Peter, just hours later, just a few measly hours later, he lied 3 separate times about the company that he kept. He lied 3 separate times about his connection to Jesus. He disowned Jesus. He denied to know Jesus. He deserted Jesus. And what we find out later in the book of Mark, and we're not going to read it necessarily, let me tell you what we find out. Mark tells us that when Peter finally had that light bulb moment of ooh, I know this is coming, right? Like Jesus said it was coming, and the fact that it was right, when he finally realized what he had done, the book of Mark tells us that he broke down and wept. Devastation sets in. I mean, can you imagine how this guy's feeling? Not only did he let himself down, but he let Jesus down. I mean, he had failed in a major way. He undoubtedly found himself internally wrestling with this feeling of intense guilt. You know what? Right then and there, right then, in that moment, Peter could have just thrown in the towel. And quite honestly, I don't know who would have batted an eye. I don't really know if anyone would have necessarily argued with him. I mean, Peter was a typical example of over-promising and under-delivering. He made promises only to take them back. He said intense things only to break it. He had let Jesus down. What we read is that he messed up in one of the biggest ways possible. I mean, the guilt. The guilt was certainly strong enough for Peter himself to count himself out. To count himself out of the company of the man, of the God that he so badly wanted to impress. I mean, who blame him? Really, who would blame him if the guilt was just too much to handle? Honestly, who'd blame Jesus for completely writing the dude off? I mean, Peter was supposed to be better. He was supposed to act better, just to be a better person, but he wasn't. The good news for Peter, and what's great about the story of Peter is that Peter's good news is actually your good news. It's my good news, is that this isn't the end of his story. In fact, what we read is at the book of John. Again, you don't have to turn there, just make a note. Maybe you want to go back and read it later. But the book of John actually tells us that after Jesus was resurrected, Jesus, crucified on the cross, gets buried. 3 days later, resurrects again. After Jesus is resurrected from the dead, we read that he literally did exactly what he told the disciples that he would do. And what was that? He met them in Galilee. And guess what? Peter was there. Peter was there. This is huge. I mean, very, very easily, Peter could have said, you know what? I messed up. I messed up big time. There's no getting around it. There's no avoiding it. I am out of here. And he could have rode off into the sunset, never to be heard from again. Peter could have walked away. But he didn't do that. Peter showed up. He didn't back out. He was present. And this is in your bulletins, but in John 21, it actually tells us that Jesus honored Peter's willingness to stick around. Jesus honored Peter's willingness to stick around. Jesus then took the opportunity to make that relationship right. after he died, after he was resurrected, what we read is that before he ascended into heaven, we're not going to get into all that, right? You can read that in yourself. It's a whole new thing that we're going to talk about, right? But after he died and resurrected, the Bible tells us that he actually shows up to the disciples in different ways on 3 separate occasions. And during one of those appearances, it was on the shore of a lake, eating breakfast. And in that moment, Jesus once again singles Peter out. And guess how he does it? 3 times. 3 times, Jesus asked Peter, Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? 3 times. Because remember, Peter had denied Jesus 3 times earlier. In other words, this is like a classic example of Jesus giving Peter a chance to try again. I mean, right here, he got it wrong the first time. He knew that. He understood that. He wept. He was mad because of that. But this time on the lakeshore, Peter got it right. Right there, you and I get this firsthand introduction of Peter receiving literal grace. And in that moment, we see Jesus offering a second chance. And that's the second truth that I want you to walk away with today. Because what we see and what we learn is that Jesus Christ never runs out of second chances. Jesus never runs out of second chances. We see it right there. We see Jesus not quitting on Peter. We see that Jesus, he doesn't just tolerate Peter. He doesn't just allow Jesus or Peter to come with, like, yeah, I guess you can come with, just kind of stay back, do your kind of thing. I could care less what you do, right? No, we don't see him tolerating Peter. He goes to great lengths to intentionally empower Peter for the rest of his life of leading the church. But that was 2,000 years ago. What in the world does this mean for me? What in the world does this mean for you, for us? 2015, times are different. Absolutely. But what we have to realize is I think that some of us even here, some of us on the other side of that screen watching right now, some of us are afraid because we just can't seem to ever get things right. So we're frustrated. We're annoyed, we're irritated, we have higher standards for ourselves. We think that we should be further along. We think that we should be able to make better decisions. We think that, quite honestly, we should be able to not do stupid stuff. But sometimes we do. In fact, I see this a lot in my almost 4-year-old little girl, Tenley. Now, if those of you who have had the opportunity to interact with Tenley, you know that Tenley goes hard, right? Like she just does. I mean, she loves hard and she fights hard. She is one of the most independent, passionate, free-spirited, beautiful little girls that I have ever been around. I mean, she amazes me. But much like some of you understand as parents, sometimes she messes up. And of course, she gets reprimanded. And in fact, when I walked into church at 7:30 this morning, she had been to the corner already that morning 3 times. 4-year-olds, man, that's what's up. But here's the thing, right? But every single time, without fail, her tearful response in those moments where we send her to the corner, in those moments, it's like this wailing of, I don't want to make bad choices. I want to have a good day. I'm just having a bad day, as she's sulking to the corner. But seriously, within seconds of her little butt hitting the carpet in the hallway, her voice clears up. And she screams out from the corner, I'm ready to come out now. I don't want to be in the corner anymore. Can I come out? I'm ready to make better choices. I want to say, I'm sorry now. She's ready to fess up. She's ready to face the music. She's ready to show up. Here's what I've learned in those moments with my 4-year-old little girl, is that when we mess up, we can either move towards Jesus or we can move away from Jesus. I mean, you and I, we're human. We're all gonna have these kinds of moments. That is a reality. And when they happen, a lot of us may think that distance from God solves the whole guilt problem. It kind of skirts over the whole guilt issue, that abandoning the whole relationship wherever we are on the spectrum, that just walking away from that relationship just seems like that's the only way to go. But what we learned from Peter, in fact, what we learned from an almost 4-year-old little girl, is that there's actually a second option. And that's to show up. To show up. Even if you get it wrong. Church, show up. Especially when you get it wrong. Follow Jesus. It's so worth it. I mean, yeah, we can go back and forth and write a list of all the times that we've messed up. And guess what? That's still gonna happen. Yes, you will mess up, but that doesn't count you out. Fess up. Face it. Church, face him. Allow God himself to start to call the shots in that relationship without you or me just bailing on it before it even gets started. Because he's not going anywhere, so you don't have to either. Because when you mess up big, when I mess up big, what we read is that Jesus Christ forgives big. He never runs out of second chances. What we see is that he is going to meet you where you are, but you and I have to show up. Don't let the guilt of messing up, don't let the sense of failure from getting it wrong. Don't let the frustration of not being who you want to be or where you think that you should be, don't let those things hinder you from doing the greatest thing that you will ever do. And that is following Jesus Christ. Church, don't give up. Don't give up on Jesus. Don't simply toss aside or scrap the entire thing because you don't think that you're doing it as well as you think that you should be. If you've heard nothing else this morning, I think this is going to be one of the greatest things that you hear all morning. And it's this. You. Me. We just have to keep doing the best that we can. And in those moments, again, when, not if, when we don't get it right, and again, we won't, allow Jesus Christ, the Son of God, allow him to meet you where you are. Because there's always grace. There's always forgiveness. There is always the invitation to keep following Jesus. Because he never runs out of second chances. The very first time that Peter ever encountered Jesus, Peter was fishing, working, and a guy came up to him and gave him an invitation. You fast forward about 3 years. It was that exact same invitation that Peter received those 3 years later, sitting on a lakefront around a bonfire, eating breakfast. As Peter's greatest time of failure, his biggest sense of inadequacy and uncertainty, Jesus, I imagine him sitting across the fire, looked through it and said, Peter, follow me. And to you and to me, regardless of what you walk through those doors with, regardless of what you've done in the past, regardless of whatever you're wrestling with right now, however big or small your sense of guilt is for whatever you've done or whatever was done to you, Jesus is offering the same invitation. He's saying, follow me. He's saying, don't quit. Keep coming back to me. Keep following me. I am going to keep showing up. Why don't you show up too? In a moment, I'm going to pray. And as we always have, the altar in the front will be open if you need to come and pray with somebody. The prayer team will be here. We're going to worship. You can have whatever space that you need. But I just simply challenge you to figure out what it means for you in your world, in your perspective. How can you keep showing up? Regardless of what you feel, regardless of what you think that you know, follow me, is what Jesus is saying. The invitation is out there. The invitation is open. It's not exclusive. It's to every one of us. Jesus says, follow me. I'm going to show up. You keep showing up too. God in heaven, Lord, right now I just thank you for the incredible grace that's given to us through the story of Peter. And God, right now, as you know the hearts and the souls and the minds of every single person who is listening to my words right now, God, would you speak to them right now in this moment to remind them that the invitation has been and will always be on the table. God, today, in this moment, God, not only remind us that we're supposed to show up, but God, give us opportunity and courage to show up, to not throw in the towel, to not walk away. It's because of what your son did on the cross, God, that we're able to live in this grace of knowing that it always exists. There's always forgiveness. And God, we praise you because there is always second chances. God, it's in your name we pray. In your name we worship.